Thoughts and dreams are powerful things which all must go somewhere. But fear the times they stay alone to writhe into despair. Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Monster of the Week, the show where we dig up old creatures from past editions of D&D and bring them to light for use in your current 5th edition game. My name is Josiah, also known as Dungeon Dad, and today we are talking about one of the most bizarre creatures I've covered in a very long time. The Gray Philosopher is just bizarre. They are a type of spectral, ghostly undead that comes about whenever a cleric, typically an evil one, has contemplations that extend well beyond their natural lifespan. Basically, in life, this creature was somebody so obsessed with finding a grand cosmic truth that upon their death, their soul refused to move on until they could unravel it. They literally sit stationary in one spot, whether that be in a chair, on the floor, or underneath the bleachers at their local high school, contemplating this one philosophical quandary. And until they come to a true realization about that one mystery, they're cursed to stay there forever. Researching this creature presented a pretty unique challenge in that it came to us from a time where D&D creatures were a lot more freely and loosely published. See, pretty much every D&D module put out back in the AD&D days used to have original monsters that were put into it specifically for that module. So unless you had a huge collection of all these modules, there'd be tons of weird creatures that would kind of fall through the gaps that a lot of people wouldn't know about. Because of that, products like the Creature Catalog came to be, which is exactly that. It was a catalog of all these weird creatures from the various adventures that didn't get printed in the actual core, like, monster manual books. But even with its printing in the Creature Catalog, the Gray Philosopher ended up in this kind of obscure space and was never seen nor heard from again. But that's what I'm here for. As always, if you check the description below, there is a link to a Google document which contains a full 5th edition conversion of this monster that I have made. So definitely check that out if you feel like you want to run this creature or you want to follow along while we talk about some of the things it can do. So today, as always, we're going to talk about just exactly what this creature is capable of and go over some of its abilities and how you would run a combat encounter with this monster. And then we're going to get into some adventure hooks and plot ideas and just different ways that you could use this creature in your game. Now, in order to understand exactly what the Gray Philosopher is capable of, we need to take a look at some. When we look at the stat block for the Gray Philosopher, the first thing that will probably jump out at you is that it has no actions. This is very unusual. Even for a creature as weird as this, you almost never see a creature that just doesn't do anything on its turn. But that doesn't mean this creature is any less dangerous than your average monster. In fact, it might be even more dangerous than a lot of the things within its CR threshold, so let's take a look at what it actually can do. For starters, it is a ghostly entity, so it has a ton of immunities, a ton of damage resistances, and a ton of condition immunities as well. It also has the one ability that every undead creature wishes it had, which is turn immunity, meaning that turn undead is not going to be able to do anything against this guy. And the reason for that, as well as just the overarching theme of this creature, is it's so enraptured in unsolving this philosophical mystery that's kept it bound to the material plane, it literally cannot and will not move. It just sits in place thinking. In fact, not only does it not do anything, it won't even defend itself. The party can freely come up to it and smash away with their magic weapons or cast whatever manner of spells they want on it, and the Gray Philosopher will do nothing. But it doesn't have to, because one of its traits is called malignant thoughts. And what this trait does is it spawns creatures called malices, which are these little ghostly entities which swirl around the Gray Philosopher, always remaining within 100 feet of it. A malice is literally a sentient and spectral manifestation of the Gray Philosopher's malignant thoughts. Its constant mental activity and focusing on these deep, dark secrets that no one was ever meant to know literally manifest into these monstrous creatures that will swirl around it and defend it if necessary. At any given time, the Gray Philosopher has up to 7 malices swirling around it. At the beginning of the Gray Philosopher's turn, if there are less than 4 of them, because presumably your party's killed some of them off, it rolls 1d4 and spawns that many new malices to join the fight. So basically the Gray Philosopher is functioning as a very resilient spawning point for these monstrous, ghostly, spectral thought creatures. And the malices, while they are just these kind of little CR1 monsters, with a bunch of them adding up like this, they can get pretty dangerous. Their only action is something called Spiteful Touch, which is a melee spell attack that just causes 1d10 necrotic damage. So that's not too crazy punishing, but the fact that these guys have a 40-foot move speed and incorporeal movement, meaning they can pass through walls and that kind of thing, can make them very difficult to deal with. Not to mention they have all the same resistances and immunities that the actual Gray Philosopher has. So essentially the way this combat is going to run is your players are going to have to try to get to the Gray Philosopher, destroy it, before being picked apart by all these malice creatures. However, that is not simply just the end of combat. When they take out the Gray Philosopher, two things happen. The first thing is all the malices disperse, because without the Gray Philosopher tethering them to reality, they can't exist anymore. The second thing that happens is the Gray Philosopher's other trait triggers, which is the Death Knell. This isn't even extra flavor I've added or hyperbole, just when this creature dies, it looks up with a knowing look on its face at whoever's delivering the killing blow, grins very wide as if it finally just realized whatever horrible thing it was trying to figure out, and then unleashes this ungodly sound before being banished into whatever plane their soul ends up in. Mechanically, this creates a sound that stretches out 120 feet and forces all creatures within that zone which can hear to make a DC 14 Wisdom save. Those creatures that fail their save are affected by the Gray Philosopher's curse. While a creature is cursed in this way, they start to contemplate on eldritch thoughts of their own. Maybe this Gray Philosopher was onto something. Basically, their mind has been poisoned by the afterthoughts of this Gray Philosopher. The creature starts to slow down. Their movement speed is reduced by half, and they have disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. This is basically the same thing that being under the frightened condition does, except they're also starting to slow down and really contemplate things. Something of note that I added here as a little bit of extra flavor is that they don't get the disadvantage on intelligence-related ability checks, because the whole idea is that this creature is starting to become a Gray Philosopher. If they die in any way without the curse first being lifted from them, 1d4 days later, they will rise as another Gray Philosopher on the spot they were killed. I could see a lot of players having a lot of fun role-playing this kind of curse of obsession given the right circumstances. And who knows, maybe if that character is a warlock or has some type of communion with a higher deity, they could even be a paladin or cleric. Maybe they think that their patron is trying to reveal something to them and they become fixated on it. I would encourage you as a DM to actually come up with something that they're obsessed with. Don't just make it a mechanical curse. Give them like a little tidbit of knowledge that maybe as the curse progresses and if they can keep making knowledge checks, they slowly start to actually unravel something. This might make the player actually not want to have the curse lifted, which could be very interesting. I feel like it kind of goes without saying, but something else I should mention about this creature too is its movement speed is 0 because, again, they don't react or do anything. It's the malices that are really the threat. The Philosopher is just kind of there as a central point and piece of flavor. In terms of actually setting up a combat with these guys, there's a lot of different things you could do. I really like the idea of them being in some type of old abandoned temple or library, just kind of sitting at the center of it, and then your party has to go through this kind of maze-like area of all these bookshelves and fallen walls and that kind of thing, while they're being harassed by these malices along the way. I mean, there are definitely a ton of different ways you can employ this creature in that vein of thought, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so we're going to move along now and talk about some. When it comes to actually using the Gray Philosopher as an encounter, they're kind of pigeonholed into a specific archetype, considering the fact that, they can't move, but there's still a lot we can do within that archetype of this creature. The original text on them says that the place you're most likely to encounter these creatures is going to be in the center of an ancient ruin, or some type of library, or basically a place where there's knowledge stored. Try to think about what this creature was before they died.
Professor, let's go!
I'm not leaving. I can't. I've spent too long trying to find this place. There's not another collection of knowledge like this on Earth. I could spend an eternity in here.
As a human being that is seeking out eldritch truths and things that mortals are not meant to know nor understand, where would that type of person gravitate towards? If the thing that they're obsessed with has something to do with a specific deity, maybe they're in a temple of that deity. Or perhaps they're obsessed with finding the secret to immortality beyond simple lichdom. So maybe they found themselves in a lich's lair, which was where they died, and then of course have been cursed to remain there until they can unravel the secrets. I'm sure the local lich who lives in that dungeon just considers them kind of like a pet almost. Something else worth noting too is what happens if they actually unravel the secrets to what they're thinking about. There's a little bit of lore here, nothing too extensive, but it suggests that if a Gray Philosopher is able to actually unwrap the mystery that they're so focused on, there's potential that they could ascend to be some type of evil godlike being. This is a process which would likely take hundreds if not thousands of years, but that's pretty compelling. If your players were to hear about such a creature, they might feel compelled to go take it down, or maybe they're tasked by another deity or whoever the party patron is to go and destroy this Gray Philosopher before it has the opportunity to ascend. And I mean, if you wanted to turn this into a real epic boss battle, maybe when the party kills it, it has that moment of realization, does its whole death knell thing, but then it does quasi-ascend, like it was just on the cusp of understanding this ideal. So it's not as powerful as a god, but it turns into some type of horrible eldritch creature that the party has to deal with. They're only CR 5, and the Malices are CR 1, so they still serve a pretty decent threat, but if you wanted to run this against, say, a higher level party, you could also always change the Malices into something more dangerous. Maybe this Gray Philosopher is so old, it's no longer spawning mere Malices, but it's starting to spawn these horrible creatures. Creatures so powerful they're no longer bound within 100 feet of the Gray Philosopher, and they're venturing out wreaking havoc, and the party's trying to figure out like where are all these horrific monsters coming from, and they trace it back to this ancient ruin only to find this Gray Philosopher at the center of it all. You could also flip the script on the evil aligned cleric thing and have them be a good aligned deity. Maybe the secret they're so obsessed with unraveling is something that will benefit mortal kind as a whole. Or at the very least, it could serve to push back the forces of evil. For example, you could have a good aligned cleric who thinks that they're on the cusp of discovering the secret to finally destroying the abyss once and for all. And then maybe you have an order of paladins that crops up around that Gray Philosopher to protect them until they can finally unwrap that secret, even if it takes 10,000 years. And it could also be a really interesting way to incorporate this creature as sort of an NPC or something around an order of NPCs that's meant to interact with the players. I like to think that in that situation, there would probably be some type of psionic or magic user that is associated with this order who can read the thoughts of the Gray Philosopher and basically speak for them. Because while the Philosopher is fully focused on unwrapping this idea, perhaps its will can be interpreted by a speaker-type NPC. Also, big bonus to you as a DM if you're running a game in Theros right now. I don't think there's anything more Greek or Theros thematically than a creature so obsessed with philosophy that their own hubris brought about their downfall, turning them into this type of creature. I could see one of these guys being at the center of any of the gods' temples, and the way that the Malices react will basically depend on whether or not the people entering the temple are servants of their god or a different god. In any case, that's pretty much all I've got for this creature today. Super weird monster, but I'm really into them. I think they're really cool. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a link to the 5th edition conversion that I have done in the description below, which you will find in the form of a Google document. Of course, if you are one of my lovely patrons, you've had this stat block for a few days because patrons get things on the Monday typically before the video comes out. And my patrons also get a kind of 5th edition monster manual style stat block that has some extra lore tidbits and the art and all that cool stuff. So if you want to support the channel and you like cool stat blocks, definitely check out the Patreon. And of course, if you have a monster from an older edition of D&D or even another tabletop game, please leave a comment below, tell me about it, and I will be happy to take a look. Also, I'm really curious to know how many of you guys have heard about this creature before, and also how many of you have actually used it or had it used against you as a player. I feel like this one's kind of obscure, but I mean, you guys always blow my mind with how much the collective community knows, so I'd love to hear about that as well. Anyways, thank you guys so much much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I will catch y'all in the next one. Also, while you're down there, please don't forget to like and all that stuff, because it tells YouTube that you want to see more of these videos, which helps me make more of them, and the cycle continues. Pay Lord bless the algorithm, sacred be it. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Until then, and this is why you never listen to anybody who says a philosophy degree won't get you a real job.